Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Strait Science. Strait Science is on the road this week in Sitka, so a little out of the region tonight. But and we wish we were home. But given that, Strait Science is an evening science presentation series put on by UAF Northwest Campus in Nome and UAF Alaska Sea Grant, also in Nome. And UAF Alaska Sea Grant and UAF Northwest Campus are public servants. We serve all peoples of the Bering Strait region, which is the homeland and waters of the Inupiaq, Yupik, and St. Lawrence Island peoples. Now, tonight, I'm in great awe, actually, because we do Strait Science, and we've only been going on for a little bit, and we have to use this media. But who do we turn to when you go in offices and everywhere? It's the radio. And so radio in Western Alaska, as we know, is king, well, next to our newspaper as well. And we are going to hear more from both our radio stations. I'm very excited because, all things surround the radio. Who isn't listening to either one of those channels? So we're going to hear tonight from Patty Burchell. She's going to go first from KICY. She is the program manager and is going to talk about their mission and history, and then questions after that. And then we'll start up with Davis Hovey, the interim, can we say that? Interim program manager for KNOM. And we're going to hear the same thing. So I'm excited. I'm a radio person. And I would say, take it away, Patty. Take it away, Patty Burchell. We're so glad to have you. And again,
Thanks so much.
For the caller, know that you have priority. So if you have a question, just blurt it out. You don't have to wait for nothing. With that,
right.
Go ahead.
So yeah, so grateful to be here with Davis, and it's just a great opportunity to share some of the history of radio in Western Alaska, because as Gay said, it's been around for a very long time. I'm going to give a kind of a thumbnail sketch of how radio came to Western Alaska, and then more of the specifics of KICY. We've been around for 63 years as of about 2 weeks ago. So that's kind of a really cool thing. But radio actually started in Western Alaska in the 1940s. Armed Forces Radio was here in Nome during the Second World War, as there was a military presence here. And it was in 1943 that some pastors here in Nome asked Armed Forces Radio if they could come up with a 30-minute program for Christmas. And
I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second. Did you have pictures you wanted to?
I do, and they're coming up.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry for the bother. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. So so they asked for a Christmas broadcast, and that happened on December 26th of 1943. And they got so much feedback from the villages that they asked Armed Forces Radio if it could be a weekly thing, and that's what happened. So starting in about 1943, there were weekly broadcasts with permission of Armed Forces Radio for radio in Western Alaska as far as Christian radio is concerned. And I'm going to throw up my screen here now so you can kind of see what we've got going on. And there it is. And so in 1945, the Nome Ministerial Association took over that from the Covenant Church, and all the ministers in Nome were given a half an hour time block during the course of the month to be able to share what they wanted to share. Specifically KICY, that 1940s time, a man by the name of Ralph Hansen was in Golovin at the time. And the Covenant Church has had a presence in Norton Sound and the YK Delta region since the mid to late 1900s, with missionary service there and church planting and equipping local native pastors to then become missionaries. In fact, in 1919, the first Christian missionary native, Wilson and Minnie Ganungan, a couple from Elam, were sent with the blessing of the Elam Church to Mountain Village to plant a church. And 100+ years later, that church is still functional today. And so there were native pastors as well as Swedish and American pastors in these villages. And Ralph Hansen was one of those in the 40s. And in 1945, Ralph Fondell had been a radio guy in the Navy, and he got started thinking about radio in Western Alaska. The Covenant Church is based in Chicago, and the Evangelical Covenant Church was originally Swedish, came to America, and the American Evangelical Covenant Church was a sister church for the Swedish church, and they have always had their sights on evangelism in Alaska and in Russia. And so that was kind of the impetus for all of this. There were covenant villages throughout the Norton Sound region and in the YK Delta region. And as I said, many of those didn't have pastors, but they had a rich Christian tradition there. And so the folks started thinking about how they could connect these villages to encourage the people living there, to bring Christian teaching and support the lay ministers that were in those communities. And so they started thinking about radio. And in 1955, a radio phone system was set up between the villages of White Mountain, Unalakleet, Nome, Marshall, and out on Nunivak Island to connect pastors between these villages. And at that point, they realized that that just wasn't quite enough. And so in 1957, the Covenant Church nationally voted to supply startup costs for a radio station in Western Alaska. And Ralph Hansen and Ralph Fondell and Bill Hartman, who had set up the radio phone system, they started working on a radio station in Nome. And the photo there is of Ralph and Bill up on the tower, our very first tower. Studio building was built, and on April 11th of 1960, the FCC granted KICY a license to broadcast at 5,000 watts. Now, Easter Sunday was April 17th that year, and so they decided to wait until April 17th, Easter Sunday, to sign on for the very first time. And on that day, Art Zylstra, who is pictured there on the right of the screen, Ralph Fondell and Jack Brown at the bottom there, two early guys at the radio station as well. In fact, Jack Brown just moved back to town. He's been around a long time. But anyway, Art Zylstra signed on the radio for the first time, saying, "Faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God." Joel Oyumek, who's a pastor in Unalakleet, remembers the beginnings of the radio station, and he had this to say. He said, "Before our village had public electricity, KICY was born. Television was not heard of, and subsistence living was normal for everyone. Most everyone burned wood and hauled water, but we had a radio with tubes that lit up and a huge battery for power. It was Easter morning, and my dad was eager, as we all were, to hear the first words spoken by Art Zylstra. The radio signal connected churches, families, pilots, city governments, and schools with music and messages for all to enjoy. Talent and testimonies of local individuals encouraged listeners during times of rejoicing or times of loss. Translated songs and sermons blessed each village and were especially appreciated by the elders. As a pastor and wife from the village of Unalakleet, we appreciate all that KICY has meant these 60 years. That was published in our 60th anniversary memory book that we published in 2020. But that's the impact that the radio had at that point, and still has today. You know, initially, we did broadcast in the three major languages in our region, Yupik, Inupiaq, and St. Lawrence Island Yupik, which at the time was called Siberian Yupik. And we still do that today. There have been many, where am I going here? There we go. Times that we've gone to villages from the very beginning right up until last year to record get-togethers. And we broadcast those services live during our evening programs, and then bring back the recordings and parse out the songs so that we have them for later play. I wouldn't be surprised if KICY holds the largest library of Native music in the state of Alaska. We've been collecting it since 1960, and it's in 4 different languages, 5 different languages. It's whatever the dialect is that the people are singing. And then there are also translated songs in English, English songs sung in English, English songs translated into languages, and then their own written songs in their own languages. And it's just a wonderful thing to be able to share that music even today. We have a program in the evenings called Singspiration Time that runs from 7 to 10 p.m. And you can hear recordings from as early as the 80s that we've digitized, that you can hear folks singing right on up to, like I said, a year ago. The other thing that KICY did right out the gate was start broadcasting sports. And we have been Western Alaska's sports leader since 1960. High school basketball, we used to actually be able to broadcast the Lonnie O'Connor basketball tournament during Iditarod week. And we did that right up until the state basketball tournaments started happening that same week. And our priority became our high school basketball. But you can see there, if you're able to see the screen, you can see Josie Stiles, who called basketball for us for years, and then our current announcer, Jessica Ivanoff, there on the left with Curtis Ivanoff, who has jumped in to help on occasion. The lower part of the screen, Iditarod is another activity, another sport that we have broadcast since the beginning. And we were there for the first Iditarod in 1973, and we were there just in 2023, right there on the top of the scaffold that we put up in front of the Covenant Church, right across from the Burled Arch. So sports are important. We broadcast the wrestling tournament every year from Unalakleet, and that's just a wonderful time. If you've never heard wrestling called on the radio, you're missing something. Tony Hogan and Sam Twarek did an amazing job of making wrestling come alive. So in 1977, the powers that be at the radio station realized that there were two different audiences. There were those that really appreciated the translated readings of gospel light and the scripture and the songs and the Southern gospel music and the Bible teaching that was going on in the AM. But there was another segment of the population that just wanted music. And so in 1977, KICY FM was born, and we went on the air in the summer of that year. I believe it was dedicated in September of 77. And it used automation, and that's what you see in that picture there. The transmitter is up in the little right-hand corner, that little thing, but the big tape players that you see at the bottom, that's an early automation system. And so basically you created the playlist on that tape and hooked it up to run, and it would run for an hour or two, and you didn't have to touch it. And so that's how the FM station started. We still just had one studio in the building. And so that was for the AM and the live programming that we did there. Technology is such that KICY today is primarily automated. We run live programming from 7 to 9 each morning, 7 to 9:30 on the AM station. And the rest of the day, it's pre-recorded. Sorry to burst your bubble there to think you're listening to live radio, but I can run with a small staff that way. And I don't have to have the staff that you used to have back in the day to keep a board manned around the clock. So that's been one of the ways that we've adapted to our lack of staff, is to be able to automate the programming. We can still go live anytime we choose, and we do in special circumstances and situations. Of course, all our basketball is live, and we have the capability of going live when we need to, and we do. So things have changed over the years. Our studio building has changed, and we grew from 10,000 watts to 50,000 watts over the course of 60 years, 50 years. And 50,000 watts covers a lot of listeners now. And this is what our signal is during the day. You can see we do touch a bit of Eastern Russia, even at 50,000. We touched Eastern Russia even at 5,000. In fact, our Russian language broadcasting began in 1964 with the very first broadcast in the Russian language on KICY. And it was very brief, but we got some feedback from that people wanted more. And so in 1973, we started a 30-minute Russian language program from 11 to 11:30 p.m. right before sign-off. We had to get FCC permission to do that, which we did. And then in 1995, the process was begun to erect 2 new towers out at our tower site. And we sought permission to beam our signal directional west overnight between the hours of 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. to go directional into Russia in the Russian language. Now, those early covenant missionaries were looking for a backdoor way into Russia, and this was the way to do it, because when we are directional at 50,000 watts, we go about 2,000 miles into interior Russia with our signal. Luda Kinuk is pictured there. She's our Russian language programmer. She's with our, that's the phaser that actually does the magic of turning those signals, or turning on the side towers and bending the signal directional west. And she is a native from the Chukotka region. She was born in Sereniki, grew up in Sereniki on the eastern side of the water there, and came to us in the early 2000s and continues to do her Russian language programming today. She's got a fascinating story. I'd be glad to go into that at another point in time. if you're interested, but itinerant pastor in Russia, and through a series of events came to us, went back to Russia, came back to us, and it sought religious asylum because of the persecution she was experiencing there, and just heard today that she will be saying her oath of citizenship for the United States on next Wednesday. So she's chosen to become a naturalized citizen. So that's exciting news for Luda. Again, because of the marvels of modern technology, she has a home studio where she currently lives in Hawaii. And she works for the United States Post Office. If you're in Nome, you probably remember Luda being at the post office for a few years. And she's transferred to Hawaii, and she's doing her thing from there. Our transmitters have also changed over the years. Ralph Fondell there with the very first transmitter on the left, a little tiny thing, 5,000 watts. We upgraded to our big 50,000 watt Harris DX50 on the right there that filled an entire room, and that lasted a good 20 years. And just 2 years ago, the Harris had seen the end of its life, and we got a couple of Nautel transmitters. We have a 50,000 watt and a 10,000 watt backup. And as you can see, the footprint in that room is a lot smaller. Technology has advanced. Our studios have also changed from turntables and tapes to the beginnings of computers and cassette tapes and cartridges to now we're all digital. And we just in February upgraded our audio boards to digital boards, and that's the much smaller one there on the right. And so we have entered the digital age. Pros and cons to that, I'm finding, as we're still working out the bugs a couple of months later, but it's a good thing. Now, in 1998, there was a refocus that happened, kind of taking us back to our roots. Rather than being an outreach station or a station that tried to be all things to all people, we decided, the board decided to return to a station that would encourage Christians and support the villages that were still, many of them, without pastors. And so that's what happened in the late 90s, early 2000s, shifted programming to a Southern gospel, praise and worship, and native music format on the AM station with a lot of Christian programming, both syndicated and locally produced. We also still air, like I said, from 7 to 10 p.m. And during the day as well, our native language music and native local music, as well as on the weekends, we have Bible readings in Yupik and Inupiaq that air on Saturday and Sunday afternoons. We also have some syndicated programs that have been going on for years. We still air Ranger Bill. It's always a favorite. And we have some other syndicated programs that we air as well.
Did you stop sharing your screen? Because a couple of us in the chat, we're not, although I think it's all very fascinating. I'm not sure. Yeah. You're doing great.
No, I will happily share the screen again if I can do that. I don't know that.
Yeah, I don't know how that dropped off.
Huh. Well, there we go. So there we are.
Wonderful. Got it.
We're back, and I'll go backwards to show you our studios. There's the interior right there. But as I said, with our mission, our focus now is to spread the gospel to Western Alaska and the Russian Far East through the evangelism, discipleship of our listeners. We provide Christian music, biblical teaching, and godly life skills, encouragement, and serve the greater public through broadcasts of relevant news, regional school sports, and Alaska Native gatherings. Of course, you know, we do our fishing reports as well and other news-related items that are pertinent to our region as they come up. And we're always always glad to share events that are happening around town. We have a feature on our morning show that does that. It's not as in-depth as other formats, but we do offer the opportunity for things that are happening around the region to be shared. So this is my staff that's on air right now. There are a lot. I've only got 2 full-time folks. Cody up in the far left corner does the FM morning show, and Nate is full-time IT, plus he fills in on the AM on Wednesday mornings with his wife, Carly, and I do the AM mornings currently, but I've got a brand new volunteer coming in on May 20th to serve full time. So we're excited to train up a new volunteer. George Bard is in the middle there. He's been there with us a long time, and he does a weekend a month. Lena Mathla and Bertha Quaylock both have jobs in town. George does too. He's a surveyor and gold miner. Lena works for the state. Bertha is the part-time pastor at the Methodist Church and runs the Bering Sea Women's Group. They share hosting of the Singspiration time in the evenings and do a great job with that. And Mary Hesse has taken on our Sunday morning classical show that Ron Horner started a few years ago. And so we're grateful to Mary for doing that. So we have an app, as they say, there's an app for that. And you can listen on the radio, AM 850 or IC 100.3 FM. And again, as I mentioned, 2 separate programs. Our FM station is 24-hour Christian music, and our AM station is more the programming, and then Southern Gospel, Praise and Worship, and the native music. And you can listen on our website. We do stream our audio, and our app right now, the iPhone app is up and running. The Android app hit a glitch in October, and I'm still working with our third-party app host to try to get that worked out. So as soon as I can get the Google Play Store to accept the app again, it will be back up. But right now it is available on the iPhone iTunes store. So that's a nutshell. We're grateful to be in Nome, 63 years. We had to be off the air a couple of weeks ago for about 24 hours as we had an issue out at our transmitter site. And, you know, we always get calls, as I know other entities do too, when we're off the air and people just calling in saying, where are you? Or I hope you're back soon and we miss you. And it's just, there's still, radio is still a valid means of communication in Western Alaska, more so than the lower 48. And people depend on it and people rely on it. It goes everywhere. And it's off the grid, you can still carry a radio. And it's just an important piece of life in Western Alaska. And we're grateful to be able to be a small part of that at KICY. So I'd be happy to entertain a couple questions, and we'll turn it over to Davis for his portion and more questions at the end if that's warranted.
All right. Thank you so much, Patty. Any questions, especially, I think our caller dropped off, but any questions from, and we've had other people come in, any questions from the group? So my question for KICY is the music collection catches me off guard. That is UAF, is Northwest Campus aware of the depth of that collection?
Probably not. You know, yeah, that's a good question. We've got,
I mean,
yeah,
that's huge, actually. And for, you know, for a university, I even think UAF main campus would be just amazed to know that. We have a lot of different arts students and, you know, anthropology and all of it. And I think that is a tremendous, I never knew that about KICY.
I was contacted a couple of years ago by a student at university in Seattle who was doing her thesis. I forget whether it was master's or doctoral on one of the impact of the hymnody in Western Alaska, and was focusing in on a group of individuals who had a family group, the Shavings family, who had recorded many things over the years. And we have all of their recordings as well as things that we've gathered from other places. But yeah,
I mean, that's huge.
We still accept, there are still people recording things now, and we'll get CDs in the mail from folks that are recording now. It's gospel music, it's Christian music. I know there are people, Native folks, that are recording other things, secular music, and that's great. Ours is a sacred collection, and that's we still add new music all the time.
All right. Rob Kaler has his hand up. Go ahead, Rob.
Really fascinating. I'm a guy that listens. I'm in Anchorage, Denina Lands here, based not too far from the airport. I listen to the radio a lot, college radio in particular, always enjoying the eclectic part, but very grateful for what radio serves me. I guess I'm wondering how you fund this, and if you could be, bare bones.
Thank you.
What do you cost?
Yeah, that's the part that
what do you cost? How can we contribute and keep up the great?
Go to our website. There's a big blue button that says donate now.
Right.
So we are a nonprofit. We're a 501c3 corporation, Arctic Broadcasting Association, and we are a donation-based radio station. We are a commercial nonprofit radio station. So we are allowed to sell ads. We are a Class 1A commercial station. But of course, the ad revenue in Nome is not nearly what it takes to run a radio station, not even a small one. And so we are a commercial radio station. We do run commercial spots for local and statewide campaigns that contact us for that. Our staff are all volunteers. We don't pay anybody to work with us. If they are full-time, they're raising support from their churches, family, and friends to be here at the radio station to work. The general manager, my position is a paid position, but because we're a donation-based radio station, if I don't raise the funds for the radio station, I don't get paid either. So technically, I'm raising my own support as well. So yeah, but that's how we do it. And we have a great base of churches and individuals in the lower 48 and in Alaska that support our mission. And we do have, several years ago, it was determined that we needed a little bit more steady income stream because power bills don't fluctuate like donations fluctuate. You know, power bill is pretty much the same all year round. And at least for running a 50,000 watt radio station, which it takes quite a bit to do that. And so in 2012 to 14, we actually built a triplex here in Nome that is rental income for us, that is a base. It doesn't cover the electrical costs completely, but it does a good chunk of it. And so that's steady income. And our advertising income then is another income. But those sources of income are about 15% of our budget. About 85% comes from the donations of churches and individuals.
I'm sure everybody's grateful. A lot of work. Thank you.
Thanks.
So when you get do you guys get a discount on I mean, 50,000 watts, I never thought about it, but your meter is like, it's probably spinning pretty fast compared to mine.
Yeah, so just to give you an idea, before our new transmitter went in with a new modulation monitor that has some power saving devices in it, our power bill for Nome Joint alone for the 50,000 out at the transmitter site and the 1,000 watt FM back in town was $11,500 a month.
Right.
Cut that to 7,000 now with this cost saving device on the 50,000, the newer 50,000 watt transmitter.
Wow, that's wonderful.
But it's still a lot of money.
I think you're paying for the Christmas lights on Front Street then. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. That was interesting, and we'll circle back around. But let's hear from KNOM. We're so lucky we have 2 radio stations in Nome. So take it away, Davis.
Thank you, Gay. Appreciate that.
And I have to say, it's fun to see both of you because we hear you on the radio now. In this format, we get a visual, so this is exciting.
Right.
In its own self.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, it is awesome. I echo Patty that it's a pleasure to be here and be given this opportunity to present on our radio station. We don't get to do this very often. Yeah, I mean, we're not necessarily competitors, but we certainly have a shared market and a shared listenership in Nome. But I think you'll find, we really support each other and complement each other pretty well, especially when KICY's focus is Eastern Russia, as Patty mentioned, a lot of the overnights, and we're focused on a different portion of Western Alaska, and we're covering 2 very different sort of clientele and information. But I think together we really cover the whole region, which is awesome.
It is.
So our tagline there, we're KNOM, yours for Western Alaska. We are considered the oldest Catholic radio station in the country. We've been around for 53 years now, started in 1971. So still 10 years younger than KICY, but still old enough to, maintain some roots and some listenership. Our mission statement there, of course, encountering Christ, embracing culture, empowering growth, and engaging the listener. Kind of echoing what Patty said, from our foundation, from our beginning, we were focused as a Catholic radio mission on the region, on Western Alaska. We started as a 780 AM radio station. That was our dial, our call letters. And we specifically, we'll get into kind of the watts and the details here in a little bit, but we specifically provided inspiration, news, a variety of music, religious programming, mostly with sort of that Catholic ideology, of course, the Catholic values and ideals that come from the Catholic Church, as we were started by the Diocese of Alaska at the time. It wasn't the Diocese of Fairbanks, but we were considered the Catholic Alaska, or the Alaska Catholic Mission, I should say, radio mission. And that was our beginning until about 40 years later, when we went kind of on our own as a 501c3 nonprofit. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit as well. But again, as I said, the oldest Catholic radio station. We're based on Sindasauk land in Nome. We broadcast to a region of Western Alaska that spans from Hooper Bay south on the Yukon River all the way north to just around Kotzebue, east to sort of the Galena area, and then west just into eastern Russia, but we're nowhere near the range that Patty showed you for KICY there. So mainly we're focused on the Bering Strait region, and that has been our bread and butter for 50 years. You can kind of see in the bottom right, some of you may recognize that face. That's Tom Bush, who's considered the first general manager and our founder of KNOM. And that's one of the older studios, but the main studio that we just referred to as Studio A. And then up at the top, of course, myself and one of our newest staff members, Scotty Campbell on the right, who's our program director. And of course, Senator Dan Sullivan in the middle there. So we'll kind of go through some information, and then I'll show pictures as I'm going. But we have the first volunteer nurse is considered Betty Connors. She stays from 1968 until 1994 and really kind of starts this movement of volunteer nurses coming up from the lower 48 to support KNOM radio mission with their entire salary. So they're working at the old hospital on 5th Avenue for Norton Sound Health Corporation, continuing to volunteer their time after they work a full day or a full shift or however many hours. I really couldn't tell you, but I'm sure they were pulling double duty, because they would come home from their job at the hospital and then volunteer to run the station here at KNOM on 3rd Avenue, and their salaries were also funding the mission. And kind of similar to what Patty mentioned for KICY, we realized that a full-on radio station would become necessary after we sort of took a look at what was being used in the community of St. Mary's. So as many listeners in the region know, VHF radio is very popular. Many communities still use that to communicate within their villages. So St. Mary's specifically had sort of a model for VHF radio that we had connections to. There were some initial priests and clergymen from the diocese that were based in St. Mary's, and they took a look at that VHF radio model and said, we could apply this to a larger radius and a larger listenership. So they decided that, well, basically we wanted a community-based radio station in Nome to serve the entire region and allow for community messages, weather, what we call hotlines, birthday messages, local regional news to be transmitted, not just within St. Mary's, of course, but throughout the entire region. So by 1969, we had been issued a construction permit from the FCC to establish KNOM radio, again on the AM. And in 1971, July 14th, our first official broadcast was put on the air. Excuse me. The bishop at the time, Bishop Whalen, was here in Nome to press play, and we started with our newscasts. Our initial staff was anywhere from 7 to 10 folks, and again, offset by the volunteer nurses. Tom Bush, who would become our first general manager, was there at the time as well. You can see some of the early volunteers here in this photo. Top left is Mary Derringer from 1983, and that's the old Studio A with similar technology that you saw from KICY. About 10 years, or excuse me, not 10 years, about 5 years later to late 80s, you have now fuller staff, and our general manager who would become our general manager, Rick Schmidt, and his wife, Lynette Schmidt. Internet connectivity issues there. And then in the bottom left, here's helping us out, and the station on compound, if you will, that existed at the time. And that was the main radio station building with the tower in the background. And also sort of, we had a mess hall, we had a kitchen, a separate garage, a lot of different buildings that were, some of which were eventually sold off, but it was a lot bigger operation in the early 80s. But building up to that, you know, we're covering Iditarod, just like KICY was. We were there for the first Iditarod in 1973, mostly using taxi cab radios, which I really appreciate. We still have kind of an old school mobile VHF radio unit that's in our station vehicle today that we use in part for Iditarod coverage. Talks a little bit there about some of the events that our volunteers are covering in the region. We're still using vinyl records, of course, in the 80s, LPs, RPMs. We go from that to tapes. And as Patty mentioned, you know, technology continues to evolve. So now today, of course, we're using mostly digital audio, but we do still have the capability to play vinyl records, cassette tapes, CDs. We have 8 tracks in the back and reel-to-reels, reels for our reel-to-reel machine. So those do still exist at KNOM if you ever want to see them. And then in 1988, a little fun trip for Claire Richardson, who folks might recognize that name. She's still in Alaska. She was able to travel to Providenia during the first friendship flight, which has also become a recurring thing over the last couple decades. So, and then in 1993, we have sort of an update to our studios. Again, some sort of switching around with our buildings in the compound that I mentioned. A few things are upgraded and renovated, and we now have an FM tower. It became clear that not only should we be serving the region of Western Alaska and all the communities outside of Nome, but now there is a need for Nome area listeners, which, you know, population just under 4,000 folks. We set up an FM tower with about 100 watts, eventually expanded that to 500, and that now serves Dexter, Banner Creek area just outside of Anvil Mountain in Newton. So everyone in the Nome area can tune into the FM 96.1. And we also increased our AM wattage to 25,000. So it went from 5,000 to 10,000 to now present day 25,000. And again, still only half of what Patty described at KICY, which is why we only have 1 AM tower where they have 3. But 25,000 watts still gets you to roughly that region that I described and all of the communities in the Bering Strait region. We're also then switching over from analog to computer system with more digital audio. The volunteer nurses now have sort of been phased out. We're relying on JVCs from the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. Again, because KNOM started as a Catholic radio mission and was owned by the Diocese of Fairbanks, we're mostly getting volunteers up from the lower 48 who are coming to serve for a year at a time at this point, and they're volunteering as Jesuit volunteers as part of their service. And that really allows us to begin broadcasting 24 hours a day. And at this point, to my knowledge, I wasn't here in 1996, but to my knowledge, this was still live 24 hours a day. So we didn't go fully automated until later in the early 2000s, but at least for 4 years or so from 1996 onward, we were able to be live 24 hours a day with folks like Les Brown taking shifts in the overnight hours from midnight to 4 a.m. and sort of breaking up those on-air shifts into 2 4-hour shifts and being able to compensate that. And yeah, Tom Bush again with us the entire way. We get to celebrate KNOM Day on our 25th anniversary. You can kind of see in these photos the transition in equipment from the old Marty units that we use for broadcasting coverage of Iditarod down on Front Street, the old vehicle taxi cab radios that I mentioned before being used, the studios themselves in the bottom left, that's the old newsroom in the 1990s before we switched over. That might have been even late 80s. And then in the bottom right, you can kind of see Rick Schmidt, our general manager who took over for Tom Bush, You can see the renovated studios that we updated in 2016 and have been using since then. So again, technology changed, our staffing models changed. And then we kind of get into the more sad and serious nature of our history, but I wanted to give time for this. Just acknowledging this may be traumatic or triggering for folks who read this or have experienced this trauma. So I apologize in advance. And but this is also a part of our history. And this part of the presentation was written by former General Manager Tom Bush. He talks about when he first learned of the accusations against Jim Poole, who was involved in the beginning days of KNOM and helped set up KNOM after the idea to replicate that St. Mary's VHF radio that I had mentioned. But in 2004, Tom Bush, who was still general manager at the time, found out that Jim Poole and the diocese were being sued for acts of heinous proportion that he had committed in the region. And Tom Bush is basically overwhelmed with sorrow and grief and has to write letters to all of our donors, our staff, our volunteers, and to the public to basically acknowledge what's going on in the lawsuit, and also clarify that he had no knowledge of what was going on, and the acts that Father Poole committed. So then that brings us to the transition from the Diocese of Fairbanks and KNOM being owned and operated by the diocese to now KNOM Radio Mission becomes incorporated on its own in 2009. And by 2010, we have a 501c3 status and have become renamed KNOM Radio Mission Incorporated, rather than that Catholic Alaska Radio Mission that I mentioned before. So at this point in time, we are now out from under the Diocese of Fairbanks. We have an ability to basically focus on the programming that Western Alaska deserves and needs. That goes to Alaska Native language, cultural revitalization. I already mentioned local and regional news, weather. We still continue our community hotlines and birthday wishes. We still air mass every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Most of the time from St. Joe's Catholic Church right here in Nome. We still have the Rosary Hour that airs every night at 9 p.m. and still that variety of music that I mentioned before that continues on and has been part of the fabric of KNOM since 1971. We're, of course, also known for Iditarod coverage. We continue to do local elections and coverage of big community events and news as it happens. Of course, when we have the staff, we cover more. And this just reiterates what I said earlier. Our reach expands from Hooper Bay to Shishmaref, and that kind of gives you, I mean, obviously that's the whole state, but that covers really the Inupiaq speaking communities, Central Yupik speaking communities, St. Lawrence Island, of course, a little bit of Eastern Russia, and just getting south into the Yukon River communities and a little bit north into the Northwest Arctic Borough, just south of Kotzebue and KOTZ region. Unfortunately, we are not like KICY in that we don't have the ability to translate our programming from English into Alaska Native languages. I know there were different periods over KNOM's history where certain volunteers or staff were able to strike up relationships with community members who were very fluent in both English and their Alaska Native languages, which was awesome. And we were able to broadcast more of that content in Inupiaq, in St. Lawrence Island, Yupik. But unfortunately, at this point, we haven't been able to partner with someone like Luda that KICY has. So hopefully that will be something that you hear more of in the future, though. And of course, I would be remiss, we'll come back to the jobs here, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about our new general manager, who is Inupiaq, Inurak Evans, who came from Nome and is from this region. She is returning to Nome by the end of this month, early June, and is taking over as the general manager of KNOM. So I fully expect she will be sort of leading the charge for revitalizing the cultural content, the rich stories that come from our region. And she has a full sort of statement out on our Facebook page if you want to go look at that. So that is Inurak. And then I'll go back real quick just to say we are always looking for more local and regional collaborations, more staff members, more folks to just spend some time with us at the station, even if you don't have any radio experience or sort of get nervous on the microphone like a lot of us do. We certainly have a place for you to just spend some time with us, either volunteer as a DJ or volunteer some of your time to learn more about KNOM. Or if you want to work with us full time, we certainly have quite a few positions open as well. But I think that wraps it up for me. So more information on KNOM.org. We have a QR code. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff. So thank you.
Awesome. Just awesome hearing about the radio. I mean, we just take it, I kind of take it for granted, but at the same time, I just think the radio is so awesome in our region and really interesting, and to hear our history, and thank you for being so upfront with all the history. And with that, I know we don't have, this is the time that the audience should write in give a little love to Patty and Davis, because it's never easy to be although their voices, they're not used to being seen while they talk. So that was probably different for them. Are there any questions? I know I have a bunch actually after hearing all these things. Okay. You guys ready?
I think so.
Ready.
Okay. Oh, Rob
what's up?
Kaler beat me to the punch. Rob Kaler, go ahead.
I was curious, do your stories get syndicated, kind of like an Associated Press, where you do a story? And I'm an agency biologist, and I think what you guys do is wonderful. And I'm looking for ways. I think of, again, I said I listen to a lot of public radio here in my basement office. Underwriting, that kind of thing. I guess maybe Patty, that's a little bit more commercial, not underwriting for you, but KNOM perhaps as a nonprofit. But then I'm thinking about, public's, PSAs, and how we could coordinate and underwrite maybe some of, support what you do. Just
Yeah.
Thanks. Great presentation, to both of you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, appreciate seeing you. And yeah, I know we've heard you before for USFWS. It's great to have you. I'll just speak real quick for me, and then Patty can go. But in terms of programming, yeah, we do have underwriting options. But typically for our hotlines and community announcement program, that is all free. We read PSAs that folks send us free of charge, so that's always available to you and to any agency or entity. In terms of news stories, there is a little bit more of that syndication aspect that you were kind of hinting at, where our coverage may get picked up by Alaska Public Media in Anchorage or throughout the state. We don't have any sort of national syndication or partners, but at least for news coverage, that would definitely be something you would see elsewhere across Alaska.
And our
Do they
announcers
give you
use,
credit?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Gay?
Do they give you credit when they scoop your
Yep,
story?
they acknowledge it comes from KNOM. Yep.
Okay, that's nice.
So our public service announcements are sprinkled in throughout the day. Our announcers use them usually once an hour, depending on what's come in. You'll get a mention, at least once a day, if not more often, if we do have a few. And if it's something specific that is of I guess more of a significant community-wide information. Gay was talking earlier about the algal bloom and things that really need to get out. As I mentioned, we do have that kind of an interview format during our morning show for a quick 3 to 5 minute hit it hard and then follow it up with the PSA kind of thing that we would do. We also have run pre-recorded public service announcements from various entities that would choose to do that want it in their own voice. And that's a nice thing too. We have the capability of producing things like that. So that's a possibility. And we do those free of charge if they are of community interest. So anything that's not directly, because of our commercial status, if it's something that is a part of a business, we obviously don't give free advertising, but if it's a public service to the community, we're absolutely glad to share as much of that information as we can.
Yeah, and thanks. And the last, my thought is, translating into more local language, ways that we might be able to do that. And that's kind of the underwriting question, and supporting the radio stations. But yeah, thanks.
We have the Division of Elections uses us to get word out in 3 different languages about elections things right now. Yukon Kuskokwim Health Corporation also has some things running in the Yupik language on occasion with us as far as public service announcements regarding health and safety in their region. And so we do offer those opportunities if people send us those files. We don't have anybody on our staff that can do the translation, but we happily air translated files as part of our public service announcement segments.
Yeah, I would echo that. The Division of Elections is great about providing expert translators for all Alaska Native languages. And like Patty said, they typically send us files that are already recorded in English and translated to Alaska Native languages. So if your agency, Rob, for example, was able to do that and provide those translations and be confident in those translations, we would certainly air them for free, no problem. We just, KNOM at least does not have the ability to translate those, at least not right now.
Do you guys have a if someone like an agency could provide funding to get the translations done locally, is that something that you have the capacity to handle that kind of transaction? It sounds like Patty, the KICY does, and KNOM.
Well, for us, I mean, it would involve then, hiring or contracting with a translator, which certainly can be done. I mean, we have, there are more efforts underway in the region, as you know, to revitalize Inupiaq. So we are seeing more fluent Inupiaq speakers. But I also know, at least in my personal network, they're all very, very busy. So I'm not sure how much work they would be able to take on. But we have at least been able to partner with Yauyuk Alvena Stimful and her daughters in prior situations for different programs or translating just specific content, but it's never been a consistent translation service or that we have programmed. So
yeah, I would just add to that it's very unusual that the Division of Elections sends us Inupiaq. They have a hard time finding Inupiaq translators themselves. And so people that are able to take, as you know, Inupiaq is in the process of being revitalized. And so the breadth and the depth of vocabulary and being able to communicate a message in that language is coming, but it's perhaps not quite there yet in very many people, and finding those people who have that skill is difficult.
So
not that I wouldn't be open to it. Absolutely. If you've got somebody, I'm willing to talk.
Well, and then we have the dialect, if a lot of people just revert to Barrow, and that's all good for North Slope Borough, or Utqiagvik dialect, but really we have our own wonderful dialects down here of Inupiaq. So yeah, it really needs to be Bering Strait somehow dialect.
And then Elam's Yupik. So I mean, there's that.
Yep. And Rob, just so you know, we're already planning, and I'm down here for a meeting about harmful algal bloom, but with the avian cholera problem potentially raising its head and concurrent potentially with harmful algal bloom, there's already talk on how we're going to make sure that our neighbors to the west, and I mean, I think this is a huge bonus that really is important in our region, especially as the maritime boundary becomes a little bit more stiff given the current geopolitical situation, but at the same time, the shared marine resources that are utilized on both sides, we sort of have a moral obligation for, regardless of the geopolitics, to share information with our neighbors that sort of has to do with public health, of food and things like that. So we're already working on plans to maybe get translations and also fire off messages just to make sure not only our region is in the know, but we can, through these wonderful, both tremendous resources, fire that off into sort of blindly, passively send information across. And I know that I was one time in a sticky situation in west of Aracam Island, in a place I didn't know where I was, in a cabin due to some extraordinary circumstances. And after having to make a break out of that cabin and getting to a nicer area, I turned on a radio, and I thought, oh my gosh, I can speak Russian, and I could actually hear Davis Hovey. And it was very comforting to hear the weather at that point. So it had been a bit of an extraordinary situation. And so I thought, well, I'm not that, all is not lost. I can hear Davis. So, all right, we'll get out of here. So anyway, it really does make a difference. And people are listening, because I just turned the radio on and they were already preloaded to KNOM, and ostensibly for the weather, I would think. Yeah. Rather extraordinary, honestly. So Davis, you were a very calming voice for me.
We have solar powered radios, Gay, that are pre-tuned to KICY, and Luda used to take them over with her to Russia when she had to renew her visa during the days that she had to do those.
Yeah,
she just hand them out by the basketful. And so that's a really cool thing. A lot of folks take those solar radios to camp with them, and it's just a good way to stay connected.
Absolutely. I mean, for all things, Murbach, whatever's coming our way, we wanna know about it. So, and you guys deliver instantly. So here's a question. How come you guys aren't streaming?
Yeah, so I didn't bring that up, but thank you, Gay. That's a good question.
I figured it's the Russian thing, maybe.
No, it's not the Russian thing.
Okay.
So KNOM only broadcasts on 780 AM, 96.1 FM. You can't stream us like you can KICY online or with an app. That has some layers to it, but basically it leads into kind of our funding model. So KNOM pretty much after it went away from the volunteer nurse salaries paying for the station, turned to donations from the lower 48. So 95+% of our donations come from donors who live outside of Alaska. And the majority of them can't hear KNOM. So they connect with us through our website, through the content that Tom Bush used to write in the Nome Static, the newsletter that we send out to them on a monthly basis in the mail. And then after Tom passed, that duty was passed on to Lynette Schmidt, and now currently KJ, who's on this chat. But we've basically been able to fundraise and rely on donors from the lower 48 who can't hear us. And if all of a sudden we had streaming, I think there are some concerns from our board of directors that that might jeopardize part of our funding source, and that would fundamentally change KNOM's focus. So it's still a work in progress. There are ongoing discussions about streaming. It's something that I really hope we can get in the near future, because I, for one, would love to hear KNOM wherever I go. So, yeah.
All right. I just figured it was all the I Spy stuff. KJ, go ahead.
If you don't mind, I might add to that, because it is a work in progress, and we would very much like to change that situation. So in the next couple of years, in the next 5 years, that's something we're building toward. And it's all part of healing for KNOM, as we've become our own organization. It's not got the same ties to the Catholic Church. And it's all part of stabilizing and healing after the trauma that we've been through as an organization. So that's a piece of it. But we would like to change that, but it is going to take some time. And and as Davis alluded to, also, it's also a way to it has been a way and is a way to protect the region from becoming kind of put on display or completely exposed to
appreciate that,
attention
actually.
from the whole country.
Yeah,
Because KNOM has a very, very large audience, and especially online. I don't think everyone in Western Alaska who listens just to the radio understands, just how quickly our articles, our news stories do get picked up, not just in Alaska, but around the country. And so it's also a way to, it has been one way that the radio signal, our hotlines, our birthday greetings, our call-ins that are so special in this region have been protected and shielded from folks like PETA and others who maybe don't understand our Western Alaskan way of life. So that's something that we really want community input in, and we really really welcome this conversation and talking about, how do we stream without causing harm. So that's my 2 cents.
I had never thought of it in that light. And I think you're spot on. And in fact, I would say, forget the streaming, honestly, just for that alone. Sea Shepherd and some of the other organizations, some of our own history, which we thank you for being so honest about that. And all of that, never really thought about that. We're so lucky out here, and we have such a, honestly, people, this region, everyone in it is a national treasure, in my opinion. There's just nowhere like it. The knowledge, what we do. So anyway, yeah, thank you so much, KJ. That has switched my train of thinking. Don't be so selfish where I want to hear KNOM all the time and KICY.
But it's interesting that the flip side of that, and I certainly appreciate that, and that's something that is, we do have something special here, and
we
you
do
don't want to expose that to change unless we here locally choose to change that. And so I appreciate that very much. KICY actually started streaming our radio station at the request of Alaska Christian College down in Soldotna. And it's a 2-year college that was set up with the express purpose of bridging the gap for students between village and 4-year college. They offer 2-year degrees in behavioral health and paraprofessional teacher's aid kind of courses, as well as good solid biblical training. And they were finding that, as we know, Native Alaskans from Western Alaska don't often, I don't want to use the word survive, but they don't often complete a 4-year degree because family ties are so tight in villages that it's just hard to be gone from the village. And they flounder a bit in a big city, and rightfully so. It's very foreign. And in 2006, I believe, as Alaska Christian College was trying to figure out how to retain students better, the college president went to the students and said, "Hey, what would make this more like home?" They tried communal living, they tried good support, they brought in they brought in elders and residents, and how can we do this? And the thing that kept coming up was KICY, and that was a piece of home. And so Keith Hamilton called up Dennis Weidler, then general manager, and said, "Hey, is there any way that we can get this streamed so that we can have KICY here in Soldotna?" And that was the beginning of why we started streaming, was so that they could be piped into the dorms every night as the kids were getting ready for bed. They could have a piece of home, and that's the flip side. I mean, it's a comfort to those that have moved out of the region, as you, Gay, tuned on your radio and found a comforting voice. It was home. And so, there's a both and it's walking that tightrope, and it's finding that fine balance between how best to do that.
If I could quickly just add, we've certainly heard similar feedback from folks who used to live in Nome in Western Alaska that live elsewhere in the state, and they want to hear what's going on at home. They want to hear those announcements and hotlines and local regional news that they can't get anywhere else. And I find it really interesting that both of our radio stations, as different and similar as we are, neither one of us requests funding from our listeners, from our.
Well, we have several that
Right.
absolutely, yeah.
We're not specifically targeting
No, not
Western
targeting. They
Alaskans
choose
for
to.
funding,
Correct.
but we still have donors who live in Western Alaska in the state. And it's really interesting to me that both radio stations have been able to exist for so long
Mhm.
and provide and be on the air and provide this service without having to really ask Western Alaskans to
It's
keep
true.
us going.
Yeah. We don't do share-a-thons.
Right, yeah.
Does-
You'll never
does
hear
the, you know, every year on the permanent fund, there's the click and give.
Mhm.
Does that help you guys both? I know that I won't.
We're on there most of the time. Yep. As an
Because,
option.
yeah, because we were set up as a nonprofit in Illinois, we don't qualify. Because our church headquarters is in Illinois, and that's
Right.
where we were established as a nonprofit. So we don't qualify for Pick, Click, Give, but we do have folks, and we have churches in the region that
Yeah.
support us. We have individuals that support us. It's
Okay. And last but not least, so I know you both want volunteers and people to come and join in. So I recommend everybody go find the actual offices. Last question, and this one be for Davis, because I was listening, but maybe I wasn't hearing it. What happened to the whales? There was some guy in Wales and there was a bathtub and they went, what was that? What was the bathtub crossing? And it didn't go well. So I was like,
no, you're good. That was just a fun little key piece of KNOM's recordings. And I kind of failed to mention when Patty was talking about the collection that KICY has, you know, KNOM's collection of physical audio is probably not that big, obviously, because we're 10 years younger. However, we still have interviews on reel to reels. We still have cassettes. I mean, it's hundreds of recordings that are really important to this region. And we want to make sure those are digitized, because we haven't gotten quite to the level that KICY has where we've been able to digitize everything. But one of those interviews happened in 1973 when, Les Brown and Roy Wells went to Wales, and a California man at the time had been trying to cross the Bering Strait in a bathtub with, I guess, specifically they said he had 1,000 letters of friendship that he was bringing to the Soviet Union. So we covered that crossing live and had an interview with him, and that only exists in a physical format right now. But yes, the crossing was unsuccessful, Gay. So yeah.
it must have been, if he didn't die, it must have been within the first 10 yards.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And any questions from the group? I see that there's some chat in there, but you got kudos and thank you, KJ.
Yeah, I noticed a few people joined late, but yeah, if there are any other questions, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't hear anything. So, looks like there's a chat. Thanks, Patty. That was Rob Kaler. Yeah, thank you, Rob, for joining us tonight. Very fun. Thank you so much, Patty. And thank you very much, Davis. We have the next Strait Science is scheduled for the 18th, but we will see about that. It's in flux at the moment, and we will let everybody know once we get that under control. With that, Patty and Davis, if you want to stay on for just a second after, we'll say goodnight to everybody. All right. Thank you, Carol. And have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.